images actually dating back to the 60s and 70s when plants first began to start growing in containers on mass scale. And I'm primarily referring to professional production, large scale production of ornamental trees and shrubs and some fruit crops as well. And they call them cans. All right. And even today, a lot of nursery folks will still say can to can or put the cans down. And the can dates back 50 plus years when they used egg cans, as seen here in these images. And they used a mineral soil or a mineral soil and bark mix. And my goodness, have we evolved a lot from this. All right. And I'll highlight some of those things as we go through today. Okay. So the Horticultural Substrates Lab, I was extraordinarily fortunate in every conceivable way to both have my graduate training. My master's degree was in compost and compost systems, growing greenhouse tomatoes. My Ph.D. at Virginia Tech was in engineering wood fiber and engineering new materials to use to grow plants in containers. So I had a lot of training in soilless media and soils and different types of growing media. But I came to NC State where there were a team of professionals led by my dear friend and true mentor and brother in life, Bill Fontenot, who served NC State University for 45 years. And he created the Horticultural Substrates Lab as a tool by which to help the industry in product certification, product development. Let's kind of get on the same page and let's make soilless media actually a science. Let's turn growing media into a science to keep up with the ever-changing pace of horticulture today. So I stepped into that, and what a joyful thing that is. Now everyone is now retired except me, so I'm carrying the banner. But as we like to say in research world, folks, it doesn't matter what the discipline, medical, engineering field, or even horticultural science. We do research for one of two reasons. Everything's done for one of two reasons: to solve a problem or to create an opportunity. And those two sometimes can be cross-linked, other times they aren't. So we enjoy doing both of those in our lab. Several years ago, my colleague I just mentioned, Bill, and I kind of were thinking about the importance of growing media, substrates as I will refer to it, in horticulture. And we came up with Atlas. And I have actually sitting here right on my desk, if you can see me, I still have Atlas on my desk because this is horticulture, all right? The world is horticulture and Atlas is holding it up, and we are substrates. Folks, it all starts with soils, and I am a true testament. I'm a true believer of that. We're going to talk a bit about that today. All right, let's talk about nomenclature a little bit. I mentioned about names. Sometimes when I interact with growers or consumers or whomever, and we're discussing something that I know a lot about, or at least I hope to, and that they know a lot about, there's often a disconnect in our ability to communicate because the terms we use are very different, okay? So let's just kind of get on the same page. And when I talk about soil, all right, here's some of the synonyms, if you will, for soil: field soil, mineral soil, topsoil, grow soil, urban soil, garden soil, and of course you have to add dirt into that as well. And then soilless, all right, substrate, and I put substrate in red just because that and growing media are the two most commonly used terms to describe these products, at least in the scientific and the professional world. However, rooting media, growing medium, potting mix, soilless mixes, potting soil, hydroponics, all of these are terms that also are associated with soilless growing. Now, folks, what this basically means is any material that's listed here, any one of these names, is comprised of materials that are not soil. They are not mineral soil. And we'll talk about some of those as we go through today. As I mentioned, as being at a flagship tier 1 research institution at NC State University, one of our goals, all right, multitasking goals are research, teaching, extension, outreach, mentoring, and I have the absolute pleasure of getting to do that, as Arlene mentioned, to a lot of undergraduate students and then some phenomenal graduate students over the years. But we're training the next level, the next generation of professionals whose goal will be to lead us forward in producing plants and landscapes and managing those systems well into the future. So I take a lot of pride into that. We do a lot of testing, folks, and I wanted to start off sharing a little bit about the fingerprinting, the absolute detailed methodical testing that goes into creating new soil or soilless media products, so that when you buy them, hopefully they have went through the entire litany of tests so that they're as well suited, reliable, and as consistent as possible. So we're always testing all of these physical and hydrological properties, a lot with water capture and water movement. Of course, chemical properties, we know about pH and salts and other constituents that can be harmful to plants. And then biology. Biology is huge, all right? We love to build biology in our soils, and biological properties in our soilless media is equally as important. And then the last thing, just to share with you a bit, one of the things that we in this lab are known for is a lot of engineering of raw organic materials to create new materials, new soilless media components. All right, I've got several that I'll show you in a few minutes, but we do a lot of engineering with woods and barks. The photo in the bottom right is miscanthus, a lot of miscanthus grass research that we're beginning to start evaluating a bit more. Agricultural feedstocks, other biomass. We do a lot of different work with raw materials, okay? Thinking about sustainability, local regional materials to create products. That's kind of what we're looking at, all right? A bit about function, all right? Now, I'm not going to get too in depth, but I want to pose a scenario to you, all right, to hopefully further separate soil versus soilless, okay? Now, this is a concept that a former graduate student and I came up with, and I want you to look. On the left column is what a soil scientist studies: water, air, solids, meaning the actual soil particles themselves, and plant growth, okay? Well, what does a substrate scientist, myself, study? Oh, well, look, water, air, solids, and plant growth. Well, they're the same. They're exactly the same, yet completely different. All right, let me pose this to you. A soil scientist is more like a doctor. If you are ill, all right, you go to your doctor, he or she can only try to fix what you have. They can't create something new for you, at least not at the moment. All right, they're creating and trying to maintain your functional system. All right, it's a doctor. That's what soils do. Soils are millions of years old. They don't change very quickly. I'm pointing out of the window at the field outside. All right. But how does that differ than a substrate scientist? We are more engineers because we create functional systems. We're not trying to recover or maintain them. So that's what gets really neat with the highly crafted engineering of a lot of these soilless media that maybe you haven't thought about before, but we're more on the engineering side as opposed to the doctor side. So functions of substrate, same as soil, all right, but in this case, we're in a pot, we're in some type of container, all right? The substrate is going to hold the plant up, support, and then it's going to provide an environment that allows air, water, and nutrition to be made available to the plant when it needs it, all right? So who's got the responsibilities here? Well, the substrate, the growing media, only provides the support. All right, you as the grower of your plants, you actually control and help maintain the nutrition, the water, and the air in how you manage your plants and containers. And that's one of the things we'll talk about. All right. Now, one of the last things on soils, just to kind of get us thinking again about soil versus soilless. All right. Let's talk about porosity and particles. All right. So you look at a mineral soil and you get a volume. All right. If you put mineral soil into a bucket, for example, then what you're going to have is 50% of the volume of that soil is going to be solid particles, little baby rocks, all right, which is what soil is. And the other 50% will be spaces, pores, all right, same as in a field, same as in your yard or your garden, but the same in a container, all right? And those pores have to contain air or water, right? And that just fluctuates, and that gives the plant what it needs, all right? Now, how is that different than soilless media? Well, folks, soilless media on average is 15% solids and 85% pores. Oh my goodness. Folks, that's why when you pick up a bag of potting soil, it's usually not heavy, or at least not as heavy as mineral soil, garden soil, because there's so few true particles, solids in that bag or in that volume. All right. Now, thanks to some pretty cool technology and some tomography, some X-ray scanning work that we've done recently, I want to show you kind of what that looks like. And this is a cube of, happens to be a peat substrate, and we can actually through X-ray separate that and actually see the pores versus the solids even within a container. All right. And this is where some of the novelty of science is kind of coming in and aiding in us continuing to develop new soil and soil products. And one more quick glimpse of this technology. These are 3 different peat materials. You're likely familiar with peat. We're going to talk about the sustainability of peat in just a few minutes and hopefully answer some of the questions that you may have about that. But you can see from these different peat types, look at all the pores, look at all the structure on the inside. Folks, that's where the air is. That's where the humidity is. That's where plant roots thrive and grow. So being able to see inside and engineer these different components allows us to make better recommendations on plant growth in containers or any other kind of soilless system. All right, so in summary, what does this mean? It means don't be upset, all right? But when you buy a bag of potting soil, all right, soilless media, you're basically buying pores, not solids, at least by volume, all right? Researchers study both pores and solids, all right? So someone said to me when I gave this reference once, they said, Brian, does that make you a pore scientist? I said, well, I guess it does, at least in this context. Hopefully that's the only context that is. But I mentioned before, but pores hold air and water, and that's what allows us folks to manage our soilless media, whether it's a raised bed, whether it's a window box, whether it's a herb tray, whatever it may be. Now, one example, I love examples because I also love to eat, all right? You're not unfamiliar with buying air and not solids, because if you've ever bought a bag of potato chips, you know you open it up and about 50% of that bag is air, okay? So kind of the same thing, all right? Speaking of water in containers, and we'll talk about drainage and how important that is in a moment. But using that technology I mentioned before, this is a little oasis cube with actually a poinsettia that's stuck in it for propagation. And before and after watering, we can see where water distributes in a container. And then we can try to modify the growing media to kind of distribute water differently or hold it differently. The same thing for a pine bark media, thinking of kind of more outdoor, high porosity mix. Before irrigation, after it drains, we can see where that water is held. So water is very, very important in how we manage our container substrates. You may also be familiar that, you know, the taller the pot, the more drainage occurs, and the top is going to be much drier than the very, very bottom. All right, so kind of looking at the gradation of the color here illustrates the top of the pot's always going to be drier, all right, and then the bottom is always going to be wetter. And at the bottom of a pot, folks, even after it's fully drained, all right, and every container should have drainage holes, just FYI, but in the very, very bottom, when it's saturated, that's called the perched water table, okay? And that perched water table can be good, but if not careful, it can help to overwater your plants, all right? I'll mention that in just a second. Speaking of drainage in containers, and we're talking about this even before talking about specific mixes, these are just general principles to answer some of the more common questions about growing in containers, and you want better porosity or better drainage. And this is one of the ideas that a lot of people have for a long time. Well, I want more drainage. I want more air and I want more drainage. You know, I'm growing something that doesn't like wet feet, okay? So I need to put rocks or gravel or those styrofoam peanuts, those packing peanuts in the bottom of a pot, and then put substrate on, and that surely is going to increase my drainage, all right? That's right, yeah? It couldn't be further from the truth. It decreases your drainage, it makes the pot even wetter, and it does the opposite of what is intended, all right? Well, how is that true, Brian? You're like shaking your head. That must be nonsense, all right? Well, let's take a closer look. If you put pebbles or peanuts or whatever in the bottom of your pot, folks, really what you have done after you irrigate it, you have just raised the perched water table higher in the pot, which has reduced the total volume of the air space at the top. So you've raised the water in the pot, making it even wetter. So this is not a good idea. And I've also known people to do this to kind of save on growing media so you don't have to use as much. It's a bad investment, all right? And then the last thing about water, about saucers. Now, this primarily pertains to indoor plants, all right, or maybe even container plants where you put a saucer beneath. So that way, when you water your plants, all the water doesn't drain out very, very quickly, especially if it's dry. So those saucers do a great job in capturing the water, all right? And then it also allows the plant or the substrate to pull the water back up and make sure it's fully wetted. And that's a very, very good thing to do, especially in a home where you need to also for cleanliness, not have water leaking all over your windowsill. But I just offer a bit of caution. Make sure to dump the excess water out of that saucer 30 minutes or an hour after you water it. Otherwise, you're doing the same thing as if you were adding rocks in the bottom of your pot, If that saucer is filled with water, as illustrated in this depiction below, you've raised the perch water table higher in your pot, and you're actually creating a very, very wet environment, okay? So keep that in mind as you're managing your plants indoors or outdoors relative to water. All right, selecting growing media. There are a lot of choices, and I hope to shed some light and some perspectives on some of the most asked questions, at least that I get for this. Some of the most common organic, all right, components or constituents in a growing media. Peat moss, we'll talk about that. There's a lot going on in the peat moss world. Coconut coir, all right, and it is pronounced coir, all right, and I knew that because I was talking to a lot of you may be familiar with coconut or cocoa peat, some people call it, but it's not peat, so I would not use that term. But I was talking to a supplier in India several years ago, and I called it coir, coconut coir, and he said, Brian, did you ever by chance go to church growing up? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, you know, there's the preacher, and he said, who's that group of people behind the preacher who sing? I said, well, that's the choir. He said, exactly. That's how you pronounce it, coconut coir. There's also bark, and there's wood fibers and rice hulls and compost. There are a lot of really neat non-soil materials. But folks, there's also a lot of inorganic, all right? And inorganic just means non-carbon based material, not derived from plants. And perlite is the most common. Perlite is an ore, a volcanic ore. Some mined here in North America, most of it comes out of Greece. There's vermiculite. You may be familiar with vermiculite. There's stone wools and rock wools. There's pebbles and pumice and grow stones. There's all different types of these products that you may be familiar with some of these. So growing media, folks, could be a combination of any of these different types in different proportions, all right? So thinking about options, I'm gonna run through a few of the more standard kind of options or ideas. If you walk into a garden center and you see so many products, what do you do? What's the difference? Okay. Well, the first thing I want to mention to you is there is a certification process, all right, that has been set up for a couple of decades to ensure that those companies who choose to enter into this certification program, that their products are what they say they are, okay? And the Mulch and Soil Council is this body, this organization. And if you look on the bottom of a bag, on the side of a bag, growing media, same for mulch, all right, garden soils in your garden center, you'll see this certification if that company or if that product is part of this process, right? And I tell you that because if you want some assurance that the product you're buying is or should be good, reliable, look for that seal, all right? And what they'll do is, to the far right, they'll do volume checks. So if you buy a 2.8 cubic foot bag of mulch, that it is 2.8 cubic feet. So they're not shortchanging you. So this certification makes sure that happens. They also test, as seen in the bottom right, for heavy metals. All right, one of the big issues, especially when you're growing consumable, edible crops, is you don't want to have soil that has some type of heavy metal, lead or arsenic, all right, or chromium. And that can come from various different places, sources, but you want to make sure it doesn't have that so the plant doesn't take up those heavy metals and then transfer it on to you, all right? So look for that seal because they do a lot, all right, to ensure product quality. One of the other common questions I have is about brand names. All right, and I too, if I'm buying a TV or if I'm buying whatever, I typically go for the name brand first because there's some level of trust behind that brand, okay? There's some tradition, there's some trust. And that is also true in many cases for buying garden soils, all right, or soilless media, all right. Oftentimes you do get what you pay for, all right, meaning the Scott's Miracle-Gro, and I am, by the way, not here to promote any particular product. You'll see a lot of different products that I use, just to be fair to all, but Scott's is going to be one of the more expensive products, all right? Well, the reason for that is there's a lot of quality control that's went into making sure that soil is good, that media is good. There's also a lot of maybe nutrients or other components in it that improve the success of your plants, okay? But that does not mean that off-brand products aren't good, all right? So number one, look for the certification, the Mulch and Soil Council certification, all right? It's gone through testing, all right? The other thing, we'll talk about this in just a second, OMRI certified, or not certified, OMRI listed. We'll talk about OMRI, what that is in just a moment, but that's basically detailing that it is an organic or made from organic materials. So look for certifications. If it's a brand that you do not know, look at the ingredient list, see if it's got fertilizers in it, see if it's got other things, and just compare the labels of the two products. And that may give you some indication of whether it's good to buy the more expensive one, or if you might want to take a risk. I shouldn't say risk, if you want to go with the cheaper off-brand option. Okay, but in generally speaking, that's what I typically don't go for the most expensive myself if I know what to look for with the ingredient list, see the certifications, and that gives me some confidence that it's going to be good. Crop specific products. This is one of the things that confuses even me sometimes when you walk into garden centers and there's seemingly a mix for every single plant you could possibly grow, and it's like, which one you do. Now, there is some validity to this. There is some accuracy, all right, to the special blends for certain plants, all right. And for example, when you're growing succulents or orchids, all right, as two examples, those two require very specific watering. They need very, very dry, not water around their roots. So that needs a high porosity, large particle size substrate. All right, so that is very, very accurate. A lot of the other ones, when you get into rose mixes or specific mixes, what those often are is the components in that bag may be the same as many other products, but maybe they've adjusted the pH to a point where it's suitable for roses, or suitable specifically for tomatoes or for blueberries. So a lot of it may not be the constituents that make up the product, but it's the additives to it that make it suitable for that plant to grow. Okay, so when in doubt, you're not going to go astray, or you're not going to go wrong with choosing the product that's for the plant you're going to grow. As you get more experienced, you'll likely find that you can buy a general potting mix and it will serve the same function or purpose for a lot less money. All right. So is there some marketing behind this just to appeal to the consumer? Well, you bet there is. Okay. But again, there's some truth to it for some specialty crops like plants like succulents and orchids. Organic products. Now this is key for a lot of people, as a lot of people have very sincere interest to be as environmentally friendly and organic as possible. So what you might see, and I referenced this a few minutes ago, is OMRI listed. All right, now OMRI is the Organic Material Review Institute, and they do not certify products as organic, but they do what's called listing. And that means that they went back and they have to pay money. The company pays money to this institute. And then they basically go through all the constituents and components of that material, and they see if all the components came from organic origins. Okay, there's no synthetic fertilizers, and there's nothing that's synthetic in it at all. And it's as organic as you can get. So if you're growing organic seedlings or transplants for sale or for yourself, if you're all organic, then you'll certainly want to do this. It's also a great marketing tool and let people know which products are organic and which isn't. Also, just keep in mind that fertilizers also are included in that. So if you see an OMRI listed product, it's going to have natural organic fertilizers, not synthetic fertilizers in those products. Okay. Seed germination mixes. Now, this is probably one of the more delicate, and I say delicate, one of the more specific growing medias that you may buy for your home garden either as an amateur or as a full-blown, full professional grower of plants. All right, and I say that because seedlings can be very unforgiving. All right, and that is if the soilless media, the mix that you're using is of poor quality. All right, the particle size is wrong, it holds too much water, it's got some pH or some salt or other property to it that's not ideal. Plants are at their most vulnerable when they're babies, not much different than us. Okay, so seedlings will tell you if they're not happy. So the quality of germination or seedling mixes is very key. All right, I would not suggest skimping on your seed or germination mix, or going for something completely alternative away from what is known or away from what's being offered on the marketplace, because there may be a lot of bumps in the road if you try to do that. So this is one that's most unforgiving. So be sure to get something that's specifically for a seed starter. All right. Don't think that you can just use any mix or any compost or whatever to grow your seeds. Could you get some success? Oh, well, sure. All right. But you get the level of success that you want? Likely not. All right. So the other thing to note about these really fine grade materials, all right, they're not good for larger containers. So as we go through different growing media types, keep in mind that one is not good for everything. All right. And what's good for small seedlings is not good for big containers, and vice versa. Okay, so there's not marketing behind that. That is legitimate. It's all behind how these different materials are made. All right, general purpose, suitable for 3 to 4 inch pots up. Okay, and that can include, gallon, 2-gallon pots, 3-4-gallon pots, even hanging baskets, window boxes. General purpose is kind of middle of the road. You really can't go wrong with most size containers that people will use. All right, often contain nutrient charges, and you need to know if it does. That's what makes some professional or some professionally marketed brands so successful. You see the commercials. This brand grows plants twice as big as the competitor. Well, this one that they're touting as growing twice as big has a lot of nutrient charges in it that you don't even know about or that you didn't add yourself. And the competitor they compared it to has none. All right, so that, yeah, of course the growth is going to be different. So know if the mixes that you're buying have nutrient charges in them. And if so, it should tell you how long they should last. So then you know when to start fertilizing, or if you need to fertilize at all, things like that. So that's very important to know. All right, designed to hold and retain water. Of course, one of the things for consumers is they typically tend to overwater young plants, all right, because it's new and it's novel and it's in the spring and they're all excited and you pot them up and, oh, it's all great. And then by the time June and July hits, you've got other things, you're distracted, it's not as new, and you forget to water as much when the plant is bigger and actually needs more water, okay? So they are designed to kind of be a bit consumer proof. And I don't mean that disrespectfully at all, but they're designed to try to hold water and be as successful as possible. All right, and it's certainly more forgiving. I say forgiving in the sense that general potting mixes are not going to be as sensitive as something for a germination, a seed germination or young seedling mix. All right, indoor houseplant mixes, won't talk much about this. I kind of already highlighted that, you can find a growing media product for basically any type of plant that you have. And unless you're growing orchids, all right, a general mix is suitable, in my opinion, and based on my experience, for growing most any house plant that you have. And again, there's such variation with water and light and other parameters around growing plants in containers indoors. But generally speaking, any general potting mix for indoor plants, in my opinion, is good, other than the specialty ones. All right, raised beds. Often now the raised bed, phenomenal concept, and it's not new by any means. It's been around as longer than I have. But raised beds are great because it allows for poor soil areas to actually still be able to grow plants in them. It allows, ease and access for you to grow without being in the ground. A multitude of reasons that you may want to do in raised beds. And raised beds are often, soils for that. You can buy them in bulk. All right, you don't have to buy tiny bags that are super expensive. You can buy, cubic yard or big bags if you wish. They're designed for good drainage. Okay, because you can't develop a bathtub. You can't have it so wet that it's just saturated. So they're designed for good drainage. Often a lot of bark-based materials and bark and other composted materials, not compost itself, but a lot of bark materials are used in these beds. Big yellow bags, soil cubed is a local product. You may recognize Bree Arthur here, a dear friend of mine, and to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and she's been a big advocate of using soil cubed, blending with other materials for small and larger size containers, even up to raised beds. Well, I do want to mention one thing quickly. Oftentimes with raised beds, what I've done myself and I have seen is if you add too much compost or too much water retention material to bark or whatever it is, then it holds a bit too much water, all right? And then you'll start to see cracking and crusting and caking on the top. And that typically is telling you that it's held too much water, and then when it dries out some, it begins to crack. And compost are very excellent materials. Be careful with how much you add because it can easily be too much water. All right, making versus buying your own. All right, a lot of people like to do your own, and that's great. All right, can be big savings depending on the volume that you're using. All right, you do need equipment of some type, not that it's very technical, whether it's wheelbarrows or hose or whatever it is. You have to source the raw materials. So you still have to buy all the raw materials, but you then have to know how to use them, okay? And that's where the expertise comes in, because how do you know how much of which one to blend? How do you know which additive, lime or fertilizer, or if you're using a wetting agent or any of those? There's a lot of needed guidance if you're making your own, Okay, growing media does not have to be complicated. You don't have to have 13 additives or components. You can get by with 1 or 2 and be just fine, but you need some guidance on doing that if you aren't trained or don't know that already. Compared to buying pre-made mixes, yeah, it's a higher cost, right? But you open the bag, they're ready to use. And as I've already mentioned, designer products. So you can get something specifically for whatever condition or site that you're trying to grow in, or whatever plant that you're trying to grow. All right. So you have to make the decision. There's pros and cons to each. And by the way, right now, sourcing raw materials is very, 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 very difficult because the supply chain for growing media products has locked up, just like it is for a lot of other products around the world. So keep that in mind as well. Reusing potting soils, a very common question that I'm asked. Old mixes, I say old mixes, if it's been in a pot for an entire year, right, and it's overwintered outside, and then it's next spring and you're trying to get that going again, there's some general things that likely have happened to that growing media in that time since you first put it in. Well, one, it's likely going to be fully depleted of nutrients, either that were in the mix to start with, or that you added, all right, because the plant was growing all of last year and it's pulled a lot of the nutrients out. The opposite could happen with an old growing media that was over fertilized. It could have a higher salt content. The point is, you don't know what the salt, fertilizer, pH of that material is without testing it, okay? And that can be a bit tricky. All right, it can degrade. Folks, the beauty, it's a blessing and a curse that organic materials we use in growing media products, they break down, they decompose. It's a natural part of biology. If it didn't, we'd be knee deep in everything that doesn't decompose, all right? But the bad thing is as growing media slowly breaks down in containers, the particle sizes get smaller and smaller. And when particle sizes get smaller and smaller, more and more water is held in the pot. So you lose the physical properties over time, all right? So there's also, and then the last thing about that, is disease, any insect or disease carryover from last year. All right, if you had if you had some type of wilt with your tomatoes, all right, some soil-borne wilt, don't you reuse that by any means, because that could certainly be carried over the next year. So if reusing, I suggest blending 50% of the old material with 50% new material, and that new material will provide that structural integrity. It'll improve the overall properties of your mix while still allowing you to extend or stretch those supplies. Folks, I find this very funny, and I was at, and I won't give names, but maybe 6 years ago, I was in the headquarters of the largest hobby market growing media potting soil company in North America, and you can guess who that is, and sitting around a group of 15, 20 of their technical folks, scientific folks, and the topic came up of reusing, and over half of the group admitted that they reuse potting soil, and that's their worst nightmare, because they want you to buy more and buy more, but even they do it themselves. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. Product expiration. Now there's a lot of dependings, there's a lot of what ifs here, but if the potting soil that you've purchased has nutrients in it, all right, if you let that sit for months or a year or more in your shed or garage, then the natural biology of inside that bag is going to degrade those nutrients. So your nutrient charges, if it has them, will be depleted. All right, pH shifts. Maybe the pH goes up, all right, above the range that you want it to if it sits for a year or 2 years or whatever it is. All right, wetting agents. Maybe not many mixes will have surfactants in them. Some do, that enable you to wet them easier and be more water efficient. Then they also degrade over time. So when you buy them, try to use them within a year, right? That's true for professional mixes, and it's true for garden products as well. Or know that you need to check, or that you may need to fertilize more. Just be aware that over time, some things do change. All right, and then the last thing, just for consideration, types of container, water use. All right, clay pots will dry a lot faster than a plastic pot. All right, if you've got 2 plants the exact same size and the exact same volume of soil, the exact same pot size, one's clay and one's plastic, you're going to water the clay one a lot more. All right, so knowing your container type certainly is going to aid in knowing how to manage the water. And then also, folks, all make sure there's always drainage holes in the bottom of any pot that you use, big, small, little, wide, narrow, whatever. It's got to have drainage holes. All right. Demand for growing media. Now, the next few minutes is just going to be perspective. All right. And I've got about 7 minutes or so here. This is big picture. All right. And I hope it maybe shed some light on about the trajectory we're heading in growing plants in containers and in soilless growing systems. All right. Now, a lot of stuff here. Don't worry too much about it, but I will say this. As I'll mention in just a second, there's some issues with peat extraction, all right, peat availability globally, all right? And some are imposed, some are proposed, and some are perceived threats to the peat industry, therefore the growing media industry. And because of that, a lot of other materials are being evaluated, okay? So what I want to show you is this. In 2017, it was estimated, and this report came out about 2 years ago, it was estimated that globally 67 million cubic meters, all right, a million cubic meters, about 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, 67 million of those was used in 2017. And then it's projected that by 2050, it's a 4-fold increase to nearly 300 million cubic meters. Oh, wow. We've got to figure out how to get that volume of growing media for the professional market and for the consumer market, the hobby market. And if peat begins to be a bit limited, then we really have to step up our game and look at new materials. And that kind of gets back to one of the premises of the lab, my lab, and other labs, not just NC State. So really quickly, what's driving this? All right, why the demand? Well, first, the plant-demic. All right, I'm sick of talking about the pandemic, so now it's just plant-demic. The plant-demic has been marvelous for horticulture and for people growing plants more than ever before, and that has spiked demand unprecedentedly across the horticultural industry. All right, so more plants being grown means more soilless media that's needed. All right, so that's one driver behind what's spiking these projected futures of volume. Other thing is, a lot of traditionally field-grown, outdoor-grown crops are moving into soilless systems. And this is a trend that it's not even a trend anymore. It's like next. It is next, and it's in the future. And strawberries are leading this charge. There's a growing percentage of all strawberry production that's beginning to be in high tunnels or in greenhouses, and that requires substrate. Same thing for blueberries. Folks, blueberries will double in capacity, and I'm just making that number up. But the number of acres of blueberry production outdoors, just like an ornamental nursery growing trees and shrubs, that's the future of a lot of blueberry production, and it uses a lot of growing media. Same thing for raspberries. I'm working with a grower in Wilmington to grow raspberries in soilless media, a very niche market, but by growing them in soilless media, it allows raspberries to be grown seasonally as annuals in North Carolina to serve a niche market, and then they die, all right, because raspberries don't like the heat, all right, of our summers, but we can do that now because they're growing in soillessly. Leafy greens and herbs, all right, I'll mention the controlled environment, vertical farming that's happening all around the country right now, but leafy greens and herbs and a lot of other vegetables as well. But all kind of vegetables are being grown in container systems, all using soilless media of some type. You can't not talk about, I say you can talk without cannabis, but it's certainly relevant to the conversation that cannabis and the amount of production in greenhouses is using a lot of soilless media. Another factor in how much do we need to supply. Christmas trees. I work with the North Carolina Christmas Tree Growers Association to start growing Fraser fir Christmas trees in small little containers instead of in the ground, and then taking these 1- and 2-year-old trees and then transplanting them on the hillsides and on the mountain, and then they finish growing them out. All right, and it reduces disease. It shaves about 1 or 2 years off the production time of a tree before it's cut and sold. All kind of wonderful stuff happening. There's a baby little Fraser fir in case you've never seen one. All right, the cutest little thing ever, right there, growing soillessly, at least in the first part of its life. And then the last thing I'll mention about what's driving the growing media world, and you likely have seen this. You pay attention to the news and the media, social media, or other true news outlets. But controlled environment agriculture is expanding vastly. Right? These massive greenhouse complexes outside of urban areas, from New York all the way heading south, and they're growing food locally. All right, and cutting the transport time of a lot of materials. And for that reason, it also is spiking the demand. So this is not going away anytime soon. So the current future role of peat, just a few minutes left here. Peat is and has been the Rolls Royce of growing media for 60 years. All right. It will never be replaced. It cannot be replaced. It's a bad word to say replace, because just like none of you can truly be replaced, I can't, and that's a good thing for the world. All right. Peat can't be replaced. There may be substitutes to it, alternatives to it, but not replaced. So I never use that word. But it's primarily the global concerns about peat is from an environmental standpoint, opening up these natural bogs, carbon emissions into the atmosphere, and that does exist. All right. They're trying their best to mitigate it, but you've already got countries like Ireland and all of these others listed that have, Ireland has banned peat extraction completely, and other countries are thinking about that too. All right. So justified or not, those same concerns are coming here to North America. All right. And the current supply chain issue is not helping with that. And one of the things you'll often see is the peat-free pledge, and people, for whatever reason, choosing to be or wanting to be peat-free. And to that point, I must mention I was a part of or interviewed for an article that just came out Wednesday of this week, all right, February 2nd, in the New York Times, and it focused on, highlighted on what to do with non-peat materials, or how to choose a non-peat growing media for seedlings and for containers. Okay, so feel free to take a look at that if you wish. Maybe the only time I ever get in the New York Times, but an honor and a pleasure to work with the author on that. And just to show you where peat comes from really quickly, in just a few minutes left here, this is primarily how European peat is cut, these big blocks out of the bog. All right, and then these blocks are dried, whereas, and it's phenomenal stuff. This photo was taken in Latvia in 2017. This is truly, and then they take these big blocks and they grind it up and they make growing media components. But in Canada, they do it very differently. They actually harvest, they vacuum off the surface of the bog, and this is just peat bog. The peat may go down 30 feet. All right, it's really phenomenal, and they come in with these big vacuums and suck it up. Okay, but just to give you an idea, people talk about peat. All right, in all of Canada, 0.03% of the peat has been harvested for horticultural use. All right, it's a tiny fraction. Globally, ladies and gentlemen, 0.05% of the global peat resources have been harvested for horticulture. All right, so is peat running out? No, we will no longer exist on this planet before peat runs out. Okay, but is there an effect? Are we impacting that? Is there some environmental negative effect? Sure there is, but so does forestry, so does agriculture, so do other industries. And there's a wonderful article in Grower Talks magazine. It's a free subscription, and this is a great article on, is peat sustainable? If this is something important to you, you can read up on it and get the latest facts. And this was just last month. All right, last month article. All right, a couple of other things really quickly. Coconut products, talk about coconut coir. All right, I do want to mention coconut just because a lot of people like coconut. They use it. It's found more and more in mixes, and it's got excellent water and hydration properties. You never have to worry about it drying out and not re-wetting like peat. It can have that problem. All right, the global use of coconut, second only to peat. So a lot of coconut coming out of various parts of the world, some in Mexico, but most of it, folks, is coming from Sri Lanka and India. Now let's talk about peat-free and using coconut as a more sustainable material, yet look where coconut's coming from. Okay, you see my point. All right. Bark products, we're in the South, folks. We've got a lot of pine trees and a huge forestry industry, and bark is a byproduct of the forestry industry, and it is a tremendous asset to the horticultural world for mulching, all right, or for being processed into different types of container soils. The one on the far left here is an orchid mix that I worked with some years back, or you can double process it and make a propagation media out of it. It's really a blank canvas with so much utility in the growing media industry. And we're going to continue to use this a lot as we move forward. And I talk about barkitecture a lot, as we really are like architects, and we're creating different products out of bark and then reformulating and recombining them, folks, into mixes for any size container with whatever air or water properties we want for germination, or even a 300-gallon pot. All right, so bark is very versatile. Wood products, I've spent a lot of my life working on engineered wood fiber, and you're already thinking, well, wood, you can't use wood. Wood ties up nitrogen. Wood's going to kill the plant. Well, actually, we've discovered ways of not letting that happen. And wood is going to be one of the most viable materials in retail, hobby market products, and in professional mixes around the globe. And that's only going to get more and more as less and less peat may be used. And when I say wood, just so we're on the same page, bark, of course, is the outside skin of the tree. And then when I say wood, I'm looking at the white wood on the inside, all right? And we're not, they are not harvesting trees just for this purpose, at least not yet. They're using byproducts of wood chips from other industries, okay? One of the neat things that wood does, Chris, I know you're looking at your watch. I'm almost finished, I do promise. Peat and wood products, or peat and coconut products, wood fiber and peat, wood with bark, wood with coconut, wood with other materials. It's really creating some really neat and novel mixes that I think you'll be very pleased with when it hits the retail shelf, as far as their water holding and how they feel, and they're clean. Plus, it's local and it's sustainably produced, and it's a renewable resource. And you can kind of see what that engineered wood fiber looks like when blended with peat. So if you see any mixes, all right, that have that in it, don't freak out and think, oh, we can't use that. It's been tested enough that you should have confidence in that. And one more little quick video of the X-ray tomography scanning technology I showed you. Wood fiber is on the left and peat here's on the right. And look at the structure of wood. And folks, roots love it. Plants love this. The water and air movement and root growth of wood fiber mixes is really, really quite cool. So other products, just and last, a biochar, I just want to mention that quickly. And this is the last material I'm going to mention. Biochar, you may or may not be familiar. I know some of you are. There's a huge history here. There's a huge projection of its influence, carbon sequestration. It does a lot of great things in agronomics, big agriculture, okay? I say noun or a verb. Folks, it is not a noun, it is a verb. A noun is a process, a noun is a product, a verb is a process, okay? Like composting, all right? Compost is not a product, it's a process, because there's so many variables to how to make compost. There's so many variations of compost. The same thing with biochar, okay? So it's more so a process that yields many different products than to say biochar is one product, okay? So be sure to, if you're buying it, all right, it is quite expensive, but if you're buying it, look for the specifics to see what you're actually getting. And there's a lot of benefits to this, but yet to be proven as much in growing media and container media than in soils. In soils, poor soils, sandy soils, we know it works marvelously, all right, marvelously to improve crop production. But in soilless growing systems, they're already pretty ideal, okay? So we're still trying to figure out how to best adopt these carbon sources, or carbon sinks, I should say, all right, for that, all right? And one quick note, benefits to substrate properties are not automatic. And some people will say, oh, you add this and it generates more porosity, or it adds this. Well, it depends on the amount you're adding. It depends on the particle size that you're adding. So there's a lot that goes into whether you add something, the effect that you truly get from that. But you'll see a lot more of this coming up as far as on the market. It's a lot of, trust me, there's a lot of stuff coming in biochar. So look for it in the product line. And then the last thing is just a bit of information as you search for other outlets. How do you find more information about specific products? Because I know I didn't give a lot of details about anything specific, but folks, the internet, the World Wide Web is a wonderful, wonderful tool if it's used properly, okay? So one of the things I always suggest when looking for relevant information to guide you in your decision-making process, all right, when you're searching keywords, add PDF or PPT. All right, now PDF will just give you PDF articles that may likely come from extension bulletins or research reports, all right, a bit more official. PPT may pull up PowerPoints on that topic, whatever it is, refinishing furniture, how to make jam, or how to make a potting soil, okay? So try those keywords. As one example, I did soilless substrates in Google, and I get all of these things you can buy from Amazon and kind of these mom and pop blogs, and all that stuff has great information. I'm not discounting that, but I want something a bit more reliable. And then I typed in PDF, and look at this, boom, I get text and books and extension bulletins and stuff that I have a bit more faith or a bit more confidence in. So with that, my time has expired, and now the decision is yours, whether you punch or whether you push. I hope your perspective's a bit different, changed. I do hope you learned something about soil selection. There's a lot to learn and a lot to discuss, and I'm happy to try to help however I can. But with that, I will shut this down and turn it back over to Arlene.
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for a great presentation. And no, I was not checking my clock. I know you're always very good, and I was thoroughly enjoying your presentation, and I was checking the questions to see what we could ask you once the presentation was over. And we do have a good number. I'll maybe have a couple of moments for some questions.
Absolutely.
And we have several of them about raised beds. So I thought we kind of group them all together and go with those. I think there's some of the better questions in here, or if I can make that judgment. So Vicky was wondering, or was asking for a little bit of guidance on some soilless media for raised beds, and what might be different for raised beds and the options than for containers.
Well,
and
I think
differences.
There's not much difference if it's very large containers, but the short answer is, I think, well, one of the shorter answers is this: depending on the height of the raised bed, because some can be a foot, some can be 2 or 3 feet. So the height of that raised bed is going to be what's most important, not the width. So it could be 30 feet long and that not change the soil that you put in it. But if it's 1 versus 3 feet tall, it's the height that's going to change that. So I think that's the biggest immediate difference between containers, which likely aren't going to be 2 or 3 feet tall, but a bit shorter. So that's why we want both water holding and drainage in those raised bed mixes. And you get a lot of different products, a lot of more bark-based. There's still peat, there's some compost. You can even use some high organic garden soils. And you can go to I didn't mention garden soil specifically, but actually, in bag products that are, you pick them up, they're heavy. They do have some soil in them, but a lot of organic matter. And those two are suitable for the larger raised bed. But take a look at the height. And if it gets very, very tall, then you may need to readjust something.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I think that kind of maybe answers the next one. Frankie was wondering if you can talk into more detail about what blends you use, and you just kind of referenced a little bit more barky and even using some garden soils for those.
Correct, yes.
Okay, let me just go ahead and mark that one. And
in other words, you're not going to buy a seed starter mix and fill up a raised bed, nor are you going to fill that raised bed with soil out of the garden, because the water, it's just not going to work properly. The plants will not be happy.
Okay, great. Can I have Arlene or someone else take over my job? I'm getting a call from Basil, our program sponsor right now. I hate to change. Arlene, are you available to help out with some of the questions?
Yeah, I'm back.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks, Brian.
No,
thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no worries. Let me get up to speed. I know I see a question here. What do the Brits call the stuff that we call compost? I don't know if that's something that you can answer.
I'm not sure. It may be a colloquial kind of regional thing, but no specific terms coming to mind of what they call it differently. And because, by the way, Britain is banning peat extraction in all retail products by 2024. So no longer will they allow any peat in retail products by 2024. And professional mixes end in 2030. So peat does have a target on it in some parts of the world, but not here.
Right. I found that fascinating. And I did read your article, and that was in the New York Times. I meant to kind of let everybody know you were there earlier. It was, yeah, great job there. We also have a question here from Nancy about drainage holes in pots.
Okay.
It says, does Brian have any comments on self-wicking pots? I'd like to try to DIY this process and wish I could buy nice pots with just one hole on one side.
Yeah, I get it. One thing I have noticed, the self-wicking pots, some of them do work, and I have not tested them, so I cannot make any too general or too broad specific recommendations. But if you even look in the garden centers now, a lot of the house plants will already have those wicking little pots in them, because it's easier for the maintenance of those plants in the garden center itself. So some of these little wicking pots are proving to be quite useful. I can't make a recommendation. I don't know, but more and more of that is being, I think, developed because it's easier, and consumers want, especially those who don't want to learn everything about how to manage plants, they want it easy and straightforward. So I think some of those technologies will continue to increase. But yeah, to give it a try.
Yeah. Well, what happens is questions come in and my question goes away. Sorry about that. So here we have another from Keith, who says he's ready for a deeper dive. And what resources are available to learn more, especially about long-term substrates for raised beds and containerized shrubs and trees?
Great question. I would take you back to the last slide, and I would do an internet search, but include PDF at the end, or even extension PDF. And I know for a fact there are some wonderful extension bulletins on those specific topics. Containers for soils for large containers, raised bed, longevity. There are some excellent resources online. Even the NC State University Nursery website has some great articles written by Ted Bilderback, the former nursery extension specialist, and he's forgotten more about plant production than I'll ever know, but he's got some brilliant resources online. So search online, use your keywords, and use PDF, and I think that'll get you to some good recommendations.
Yeah. Dr. Bilderback was also a director that hired me. So I have a fondness with Dr. Bilderback, and I've heard exactly what you've said by so many people.
He's an amazing human.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of call on the rest of my team who is in the Q&A. Are there specific questions there that we haven't answered that you all see we need to ask? If so, please unmute and ask Brian. I know they did a great job. Here's Dennis coming on.
Sure, yeah. Linda wants to know about ratings for pre-made mixtures available at garden centers. She wants you to comment on what some of the ratings are for the different brands, I suppose.
I'm not sure what the rating system is. I'm not familiar with it. And that's not to say that there isn't one, because I don't work as much in the retail side of things as I do the professional side, but I'm not familiar with ratings.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I have a question from Jim about, he says in the bonsai community, they use a product called Akadama, a clay product from Japan. Have you studied that at all?
Oh, I have not, but I have seen that material or something similar to that, but I have not worked with it. I've only seen it, didn't even get to really touch it. So, but yeah, I would think that's pretty specialized, you know, for bonsai culture, but whether there's something locally or cheaper, I don't know, but if it works, roll with it. But no, I haven't.
Now,
I'll add that to my to-do list.
Locally, we would have something called calcined clay. Do you think that would be similar?
Yeah, I think so, because there's a lot of different sizes and shapes of those clay products, those clay materials, those baked clays. So that very well could be, yeah. Now, whether it's an exact substitute, you know, I don't know, but really in bonsai, it's not about the nutrition. Of course, it's just the structural support and stability, or giving it the landscape look if you're aiming for that in the little scape system.
Sure, thank you. Julie wants to know, you mentioned soil cubed. She wants to know if that is certified.
Not through the Mulch and Soil Council, I do not think. That's easy to double check. It may be OMRI listed, but not through Mulch and Soil Council, I do not think. Okay. And again, I always hesitate to putting individual products, but I put that because there's a lot of local buzz about that and a lot of proven use of that. So take my recommendations generally.
There's a couple other questions about soil cube. This next one says, when using the big yellow bag soil, I assume that means soil cube.
I think so.
Do you need to amend or add anything to the soil after the first year or two?
I think it's always, yeah, after a couple of years, it's going to just keep breaking down and breaking down. So what I suggest is this. Similar to your garden beds that you're going to mulch once a year, every other year, or you're adding compost, you're adding organic material and working it into your soil just for your natural garden bed or plant bed. Do the same thing for a raised bed. Every couple of years, add some new material to it to continue giving it the structure, the physical properties that it needs. I think that's good, continued soil health, even for your raised bed. So don't just fill it and leave it forever. Maintain it, and just like you would a garden bed. And I think that would be the best recommendation I could have for maintaining a good productivity in a raised bed year after year after year.
Thanks, Dennis. I think we're going to have to stop our questions here. Trying to keep everybody on schedule today. It's always an exciting topic. Brian, I know you weren't able to see the chat and talk, but people were just thrilled with the information that you're providing.
Oh, well, very good.
Thank you for joining us and bringing your expertise to us.